Ole Miss takes on Kentucky this weekend. And, Joe, what I think a lot of people around the country are asking, just how good is this Ole Miss team? Look, we've seen them the first 4 weeks. They've played some I don't want to say not good opponents. I hate saying it like that.
No. They haven't played anybody. It's not a knock on them. They have beat up on, St. Mary's School of the Blind the last 3 games where they haven't played anyone, which is why this is a good game.
They play a very physical Kentucky team. The problem with it is that I don't know how much Kentucky can test them. They haven't scored an offensive touchdown on a P4 opponent all year, and Ole Miss can just score pretty much at will sometimes. So this game is going to be a little bit interesting. We finally get to see and get a good test on Ole Miss. And look, Kentucky's run the football really well too. Yep. How do you see this one going out as we really get the first real national view of Ole Miss this season?
Well, so first of all, that's what I'm really excited here with this game for Ole Miss. I think that there's a lot of hype for them that is extremely deserved. And we saw that Kentucky doesn't play around. Kentucky, even though they had the bad performance, the sloppy game against South Carolina, if they're locked in on defense, they're able to put up a serious fight. So if Ole Miss has as prolific of a day as they've had against their early opponents this year, it's going to be really telling for what they can produce the rest of the season. A couple of stats that really stood out to me for Ole Miss, Blake, that are almost borderline hilarious. They're outscoring opponents. Again, we need the context of who they played. They're outscoring opponents 55-5. They're only allowing 34 rushing yards per game for 1.1 yards per carry, which is ridiculous. And currently, they're running for 248, averaging 422 in the air. They're doing some crazy stuff. They've got a great running back room with Henry Parrish and Matt Jones. If they're able to get success on the ground early, they could end up beating Kentucky a lot worse than Georgia was able to barely beat them.
You know what's so impressive about what you just said? Joe, we've seen so many teams this year come out flat against non-really talented opponents. What do we make of South Carolina? Whoa, they almost lost to Old Dominion. Then they come around and they make the dog snot out of Kentucky. They're in a dogfight with LSU. They score 50 this past weekend against Akron. There have been a lot of teams, and none of them have had the hype of Ole Miss because of what they did in the portal. To me, the most impressive thing that they've done all year is gone into every game locked in and focused and ready to go.
Yep.
So Joe, not only so we can say, well, look, they're playing inferior opponents. They're not playing anybody worth a damn, and that's fine. No, they're not. To the standard that Ole Miss is right now, you're right. No, they're not. However, Joe, I think the biggest question mark that every single person had on this, going into the season about Ole Miss was, hey, what do they look like when they bring that much talent into a locker room? Because even though these guys are talented, if you don't have chemistry, it doesn't mean anything, right? It could be a problem. Hadn't been a problem. Joe, I was reminded of something last night because, I don't like coming in here, me and you as former players, using coach speak. But what I like to do is take some of the real relative things that they've said and apply them. Great cultures and great organizations win championships while great players win games. And I think what gets missed with Lane sometimes when they're high flying on offense and they're doing this, they're doing that, is the culture that he's built at Ole Miss. And that for me is the thing that gets missed the most. Look, brother, I'm not trying to poo-poo when I say this on Ole Miss. You're Ole Miss. You're not on the upper echelon of the teams of the SEC that can contend like all these other ones, like Georgia, Bama, LSU, maybe even Tennessee. You're not supposed to be there. But for me, I'm like, you know what, man? Lane's won just as many games as all the other coaches. He's third in wins the last 3 years in the SEC. That in and of itself is the most impressive thing. But if we're going to throw out statistics, I got to throw out one. You ready?
Okay. All right. What do you got?
Trey Harris has 38 catches in 4 games. I don't care if you're I don't
wait,
care.
By the way,
air.
Right. I noticed this too, and I don't know how no one's talking about this. He has 630 yards. His He's going to hit 1,000 in like the next 2 weeks if he continues at this pace. This is absurd.
I don't know if he's going to hit 1,000. That would be kind of egregious.
Well, with the pace he's on, it's not.
Well, the pace he's on pace for 2,000-yard season. I just don't think that he's gonna have that.
Never know.
But what have we seen from Jackson Dart, who's number one in passing on all metrics and statistics? He's got a connection with Trey Harris, and when the going got tough in these last couple of games, look, I think their O-line, for what it's worth, has had some issues here and there. And I think that this can benefit Kentucky when we talk about them in the game. But I do think that he's found his best target, the guy that he trusts the most. Here's the thing in this game that I'm really looking at, Joe. I think even against some lesser opponents, there have been at times, not very often, very similar or very small times that their O-line has been a little wacky, right? Like they've missed blocks. They've done some certain things that didn't pan out. And I don't know if they're toying around with their food or what they're doing. You better not play around this weekend against Kentucky. That front seven is legit, man.
That front seven's really good, and this is one of the things that you got to pay attention to. If anyone hasn't realized, I think we feel pretty strongly that Ole Miss is probably going to win this game. I don't think it's going to be as close of a performance as the Kentucky-Georgia game. When you put all your energy into an opponent like that, you're not going to be able to do that every single time you face off with one of the top teams in the conference when you have all the deficiencies that you have. But I really would love to see what this Ole Miss offensive line is like if they can step up and if they can have a big day paving rushing lanes for the run game. Again, I'm really keyed on that. Are you able to rush for 248 a game in this game like you've done so far to this point? You're not going to hit 248, but can you have a big day on the ground against a defense that's allowing less than 75 yards per performance? They actually have tough games on their resume. You know, that was against South Carolina. That was against Georgia, that they have held those teams under 100 yards rushing, and they're only allowing 2.7 yards per clip. One key thing that stood out to me, if we're talking about offensive lines, Blake, Kentucky, they've allowed 10 sacks this season. Their offensive line has been booty. They have not been playing well
because they've been able to run the football. I mean, Joe, let's call it what it is.
It's very weird. It's very
weird because if we're going on a spade, they lined up and popped Georgia in the mouth.
It felt like they did, but it's one of those things where you watch a game like that and your perception on how like a certain position group might actually have performed in the entirety of the year. We almost forgot of how badly that offensive line played against South Carolina. A lot of those sacks came in that South Carolina game, but man, I think that they were exposed.
A really good D line, and I don't think people were ready.
Well, Ole Miss is coming in with a very, very good D line and just front seven.
Look, you're right. This could be a bad day. Right. I mean, this could be a bad day. It's not a style that is built for Kentucky. Look, man, I got to tell you this. You got to go full Michigan if you're Georgia. I mean, if you're Kentucky, excuse me, sorry. You got to go full Michigan. Like 1,000%, you got to line up and run the football. You've had success.
Yeah, but is Vandergriff – well, then you're taking out Vandergriff and putting in Wimsatt.
No, I'm not.
Wimsatt's a better runner, though.
Let me tell you why I'm not. I'm not because I still think that he gives the element that he can throw the football. And Orji, Orji's a good runner. I mean, Vandegrift really did some really good things with his legs against Georgia. Joe, I don't think he's as unathletic as people are giving him credit for. The simple nature that you can keep him in there and have the perception and thought in the back of your mind that they may throw it is why I would keep him in. But I don't know if you don't need to find ways to get him running the ball more like you did against Georgia. And look, Joe, this is just not a matchup that I think benefits Kentucky at all. If they can't line up and run the football and keep the ball away from this offense, it's going to be a long day. But there is a path for them to beat them. And the path that the way that I see it is get with your running backs, do what you did against Georgia. But Joe, the problem I have with that, they haven't scored an offensive touchdown on a P4 opponent all year. I don't know if they can score on one. And this isn't probably the defense that you need to try it, but there's a path. You just got to stick to it and be patient with it. That's the only way I can see it.
It's a tough ask. This is a tough way to kind of bounce back from Georgia, that brutal loss to go up against another just freakishly dominant team.
Let me ask you a question. Hot take here. Is Kentucky seeing the best 3 defensive lines in the SEC minus Georgia in the first 3 weeks, or first Power 4 opponents that they say? I'm going to give it to you. You got South Carolina, you got Georgia, and now you have Ole Miss. They're going to
minus Alabama. Yeah, I would argue that
well,
that's
and Tennessee that they play later in the year. But I mean, Joe, they're playing some of the best athletes on the D line that you can get.
There's a big reason why that their offensive line's doing so poorly in pass protection is the matchups that they've had, and they've been. Kentucky might be one of the most tested teams early on just in the country with the slate of games that they've had to start the year. And they failed those tests, except for the Georgia game. They played really good against Georgia, but their offense was non-existent in that game. If it was a little bit better, if it was just 10% better, they beat Georgia. But this offense has not stepped up and performed at any competent level enough for them to eke out wins. I feel pretty confident that Ole Miss wins this game. I think that there's a chance that they could cover as well. The way that they're moving the ball as efficiently and as explosively as they are, if this is like a 20 to 14 point game, I would not be shocked.
Me either. Well, Joe, nothing matters in between the 20s if you can't score. As a great theologian once said, and I'm quoting myself and patting myself, yards don't mean shit if you can't get in the red zone and score. Bottom line.
Absolutely. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.